بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. ما بعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Kafirun, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Say, O kafirun, O disbelievers, O non-Muslims. لا أعبد ما تعبدون. I do not worship what you worship. ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد. And you do not worship what I worship. ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم. Again, repeating again. And I don't worship what you worship. ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد. And you don't worship what I worship. I mean, absolutely crystal clear. Make it absolutely clear. You and I are not on the same deen. This is what the surah is saying to the kuffar. It's not as some people they say, they look to the last ayah, lakum dinukum waliya deen, to you your deen and to me my deen. And they read this and they think this is a surah about, of multiculturalism, of, tolerating and respecting other gods, other idols, either, all the people's false religions, to recognize them, that's not what this ayah is talking about at all. The ayah is saying clearly that there are two camps, the camp of Islam and the camp of Kufr. And those two camps are not the same. They are not united or unified. They do not share a religion, a brotherhood, an ummah. They do not share anything. They are distinct groups. They are clearly separate. Each one recognizes that the other is not from the same deen, not from the same millah, from the same ummah, from the same nation, from the same religion. They don't follow the same way of life. They don't worship the same ilah. That's what the surah is saying. It's saying, O kafir, O disbelievers, you and I are different from each other. You are not part of my ummah and I am not part of your ummah. Meaning, if I'm a Muslim, you are not a Muslim. And if you are in your religion, I am kafir in your religion. I disbelieve in your religion, just the way you are kafir in my religion. You disbelieve in my religion. That's what the surah is saying. So Allah ordered us to have this baraa from the shirk and its people. To have this disassociation from the polytheism, the association of partners with Allah. And anybody who does that, not just, okay, you worship, Krishna, but you're okay, we're brothers, we are from the same ummah, we're all one nation, we're all British, so therefore we are a brotherhood. And you have your God and I have my God. No. Not that, I am free from your religion, I'm free from your shirk, I'm free from your worship of other than Allah, I'm free from your idols, but I'm not free from you, but we're brothers. No. Ya ayyuhal kafirun is the people as well. Al-bara'atu min ash-shirki wa ahlihi. To have disassociation from the shirk and its people, from the disbelievers and their kufr. So this is what this surah is all about. So that is why there is an essential duty to make takfeer, to declare as disbelievers, and I'm using the word here as a broader sense, not in the sense of necessarily just calling somebody who used to be Muslim an apostate. No, I mean in general, to call the kafir a kafir. The one who does not make takfeer, do not call kafir those who disbelieve in Islam, they have not fulfilled the conditions of Islam itself. Islam is defined. What's the definition of Islam? I don't have. Whichever any of you brothers want to volunteer, inshallah. What's the definition of Islam? Istislam. Okay. Istislam. Carry on. Anybody? Istislamu lillahi tawheedan. Okay, so let's get this part in. Total submission to Allah with exclusivity. Okay. Then وانقياد له طاعة and to follow or submit to him with obedience. And the last bit is what? Yep. So wal bara'atu min ash-shirk wa ahli. To disassociate from the shirk and its people. Okay? You cannot embrace Tawheed unless you reject the shirk. You cannot worship Allah exclusively unless you've disbelieved in the Taghut. And you must recognize that if somebody is worshipping other than Allah, they cannot be Muslim, because that is what makes somebody Muslim, is that you don't worship other than Allah, that you don't commit shirk, and you recognize that the ummah of Tawheed, the ummah of Islam, and the ummah of all the people of shirk are separate. There are two distinct camps. So if you do not recognize that, if you don't know the difference between who is a Muslim, who is a kafir, how do you know you yourself are a Muslim? If you don't know the difference between, is this man a Muslim or a kafir? Then how do you know, even you, whether you are a Muslim or a kafir? There must be certain factors, certain foundations. I'm not talking about minute fiqh of takfir. I'm talking about the main foundations of the deen. Anybody, ask a child, do Christians believe that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah? They'll say no, because they're not Muslim. If a Muslim, he says, came along and said, look, I don't believe Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, it's because he's not really Muslim. You cannot be Muslim without to know. Without to know La ilaha illallah, that there's none worthy of worship beside Allah. Without to know that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. You cannot be Muslim without these points, without these topics. So that's why it is definitely important for us to recognize there is a duty to make takfir upon the mushrikeen, takfir upon those who commit shirk in Allah. Whoever associates partners with Allah, they cannot be Muslim. They cannot be good people, worshippers, salihun. It's not possible. Because everything about the Quran, there is no chapter of the Quran except that Allah condemns the mushrikeen and declares them in hellfire and warns people from the shirk. How can it be you miss that message? You read the Quran, you miss that message. How is that possible? So there's no way that anybody can enter Islam and they didn't give up the shirk, because they didn't really enter. That means they didn't really enter Islam. Okay? Maybe they still drink alcohol. It's possible. Maybe they still have other mistakes. They listen to some music, or maybe they, have a girlfriend, they couldn't give her up. It's possible they commit these sins. But if they didn't give up the kufr, they didn't give up their old religion, they didn't leave their previous religion, then they didn't really become Muslim. So in Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ was asking the people to give up worshipping the idols. Imagine somebody said, okay, I believe Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, but I don't stop worshipping Hubal. I didn't stop worshipping Lat. What would you say about him? You say this person is not a Muslim. And if he claimed to enter Islam, then he returned to worshipping the idol, you say he's an apostate. Okay, because that will take somebody out of fold of Islam. So now, the question of what is AlAATHIR, because that's what we really titled the talk about. I mentioned this as introduction to that because this is the main point which is agreed upon by everybody. Agreed upon among the Salaf, agreed upon among the Khalaf, the people after, agreed upon among all of the Muslims in the world today. Okay? And obviously I'm excluding mushrikeen like the Nusayris and the Alawis and things like this because they're not Muslim. Okay? But even you find government preachers, they will recognize these topics, these points. And it's mentioned in the Risala of about the 10 negations of Iman by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. He mentioned that one of the negations is the one who does not make takfeer on the mushrikeen, or does not make takfeer on the Jews and Christians, or he thinks that the deen is correct, then, or he said even if he doubts their kufr, then they are disbelievers. So this was mentioned by Shaykh Muhammad ibn Wahhab, and he's quoting as well from the Salaf. Imam Shafi'i said the same thing. He said whoever doubts the kufr of the Jews and Christians, or thinks that the deen is correct, then they are mushrik, then they are kafir. They're disbelievers. Right? The same thing Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. He said that whoever doubts the kufr, they are disbelievers. So this is something which is a common theme throughout the whole history. And Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Mumtahin verse 4, Surah 60 verse 4, okay, so this is in particular. Allah says, قَدْ كَانَتْ لَكُمْ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ فِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ. He said, there's a good example for you to follow in Ibrahim and those with him. إِذْ قَالُوا لِقَوْمِهِمْ إِنَّا بُرَآءُ مِنْكُمْ. When they said to their people, we are free from you, we have Baraa from you. وَمِمَّا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. And everything you worship instead of Allah. كَفَرْنَا بِكُمْ. We have disbelieved in you. Mean you and what you worship instead of Allah. We disbelieve in your gods is not true. You claim that this idol is worthy of worship. This idol is a god to be worshipped. I don't believe in it. I disbelieve in that. I am kafir in that taghut. This is what it means. Kafaruna bikum. We disbelieve in what you worship, and we call you kafir because we are kafir in your religion. You are kafir in my religion. We are not the same. We don't have loyalty, no brotherhood. We are not one ummah. We are not united. We are not one entity. We make that distancing yourself, distinguishing yourself. That's why when we say idharuddin, we say distinguishing your fire from their fire. If you live between the people, what will the people think about you? You're living among mushrikeen. Above you is a taghut. Around you are mushrikeen, obeying and worshipping that taghut, and following that taghut, obeying his laws, going to his courts for judgment. And you're sitting between them among them. What would people think except that you're mushrik just like the rest of them? On the apparent. Unless you say openly, unless you distinguish yourself and say, wait, in case there's any confusion, nobody should think that I am with these people. Everybody should understand I am free from them and what they worship instead of Allah. I am free from them and their taghut that they are obeying and following. That's the one who has made Idharuddin, has made Baraa from the taghut. I don't mean somebody, he sits at home and on Facebook he goes under a hidden kunya name that nobody recognizes. It says Abu Anonymous and goes, yes, you're all mushrikeen, this is my Baraa. But then he goes out in the streets as if like, nobody would know. That's not called Idharuddin. You're talking to somebody in Australia telling them that yeah, everybody's mushrik. But you're in the UK. How is that called Baraa from the shirk and his people? How is that called Idharuddin? No, Idharuddin is when you go out in front of the people and you say to them like Ibrahim alayhi salam said, we are free from you. Your kufr, I don't believe in it. That taghut you obey, I don't believe in it. This man-made law you obey is not my law. That's what Ibrahim alayhi salam did. That's the example we're supposed to follow. Kafarna bikum. We've disbelieved in you and what you worship instead of Allah. وَبَدَى بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةُ وَالْبَغْضَاءُ أَبَدًا حَتَّى تُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَحْدَهُ. And he has appeared. Not, I've hidden. Allah didn't say, a good example for you in Ibrahim, when he said to himself, I disbelieve in what they worship instead of Allah. No, he said, إِذْ قَالُوا لِقَوْمِهِمْ. When he said to their people. They said it to their people. Let them hear, let them know that they are not the same. وَبَدَى بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. And it has appeared, it's become apparent, it's prevailed, it's not hidden, it's not a secret. It is apparent between you and us is only what? Al-adawatu wal-baghda. Animosity and hatred forever until you believe in Allah alone. Unless they enter the Tawheed, there's only Baraa between the Muwahhideen and the Mushrikeen. There's only this disassociation and animosity and hatred and takfir. That is the conditions of kufr bil taghut. That's the conditions of making Baraa from the mushrikeen. That you make it clear. We are not friends. We are not united. We are enemies. We are from a different religion. You are not from the Muslims that I am from. You don't follow my religion, and I don't follow your religion. That is called Baraa from the mushrikeen. So now, why is this so controversial? It's something that has been mentioned in so many of the books. It's mentioned everywhere. So why is it controversial now? And where does this term AlAATHIR come into it as well? In order to understand some of these things, I think and there was a suggestion of somebody as well to do a short glossary of some of these terms. So, and it is part of Usul al-Fiqh where we talk about the terminologies and the istalahat, the words and particular terms we use for us to define them and explain them. And so people understand where they come from, what is referring to, especially the Sharia terminology. And so I do want to give a little introduction into that first as well. Okay, so before we go further, let's look at some of these terms, inshallah. So some of the terms we want to look at include at-takfir, and you can add any terms that you've heard that you're not sure about what they mean. I'll explain them for you, inshallah. Now, okay, so we want to look at the word at-takfir. What is it? We want to look at the word al-kafir. Okay, I want to explain the term jahid, the term al-mustahil, mustahil. Okay, and obviously from here, by extension, the word juhud and the word istihlal. Okay, just very briefly explaining these terms, like a little dictionary term, first of all. Okay, al-mawani'. Okay, at-takfir. What does this refer to? We could talk about the word al-hujjah. Okay, and by extension, there's two other things: iqamatul hujjah and bayanul hujjah. Okay. We could talk about at-tathabbut, at-tawaqquf is another term you need to learn about. Tawaqquf, and of course this term al-'adhir. Talk about al-'udhr bil-jahl. There's something that people call jahlul hal. Jahlul hal. Also, people use the term adamul qasad, or irtifa'ul qasad. Okay, so we'll look at all these terms, inshallah, each one of them. Is there any other terms that we want to add to that? Somebody's heard, they're not sure about when we talk about takfir and these discussions that go on. Okay, if anybody online have any terms they want to add to that as well, I can look at inshallah as well. Kafir asli, yeah, and murtad, that's a good point. Put that up actually. Al-murtad, we need to put in there definitely. Murtad, kafir asli. Okay, kafir asli. What else? Yeah, I'll put the al-murtad, inshallah. Al-murtad or kafir murtad. Anything else you want to add? Okay. Nawaqid as well. We'll talk about nawaqid. Stick this in somewhere. Okay, yeah. Nawaqid and zindiq. We can add that in here. Let's fill the gaps. Zindiq and zandaqa. Anything else? Okay, if we get all the words in now, then we'll go through them one by one, inshallah. And probably we might only get this far for today's session. And inshallah, next week, hopefully, I mean, I want people to really study this topic properly and really take notes and be clear about everything. Because when you talk about this topic of takfir and the excuses of ignorance and when is it not valid and who do we make takfir on, and something called chain takfir, that's the other thing we talk about, is tasleel. Okay, tasleel, chain takfir. Okay, accuracy is so important because putting the same statement in an inaccurate way could be falling into the misguidance and dalala and bid'ah and even aqeedah of the khawarij, and you give people room to suspect you and accuse you of being from the khawarij because maybe you didn't understand the exact terminology, so you used the term before you realized what it meant, and so you want to say something which is correct, but because you're putting it in the wrong words, you end up saying something which is technically wrong. And the people, because we are living in a time where everybody is scrutinized, especially anybody who is not pro-government, not pro-taghut, anybody who is opposing the taghut regimes, they are scrutinized more than everybody else. And this is one thing. I remember one brother was talking about with Sheikh Omar. You see, with Sheikh Omar Bakri, I'm talking about, because every word is scrutinized and checked and tested, and people try to refute it and counter it, and they challenge you. Give me evidence. Where's the evidence? Where's the reference? Everything is, you said that. I want to see the reference. Give me exact hadith number. Everything. So then he has to check everything and bring the references, bring the evidences. So that's why we have so many evidences for each of those points that we talk about. Whereas if you think about it carefully, when you look to the government preachers and they make a little statement here or there, Mujahideen Khawarij, the rulers are ulil amr, we have to obey them. They don't bring evidences. And nobody challenges them with evidences. Because he's the big sheikh, Hayd Kibar al-Ulama, he's the man of PhD, he's doctor. He's the one from the university. He is this man, he's bin Baz, how can you stop it? How can you account? Nobody will question them. Nobody actually says to them, Sheikh, where's the evidence for that? Because they feel rude. How can you possibly ask him for evidence? He must have evidence. He wouldn't speak without evidence. So those people get away with saying things without bringing evidence, without addressing the points. Whereas people like us, we don't. We're scrutinizing everything, so we have to answer. And that's why we answer. That's why we have to be extra careful as well. Because those government preachers make many blanket statements, many ambiguous words, and dodging the issue, twisting the facts, and nobody can really challenge them. But if you make a small mistake, even if you are correcting what you are saying, we make a small mistake in your wording, people will make a mistake. And you have as well on both sides, not just government preachers will do that, other people as well. Some people, they want you to make takfir on people in a particular way. And if you don't do it in that particular way, they will call you kafir. To that extent. If you called him apostate, you didn't call him kafir asli, you kafir. Is that correct? Is it not correct? That's something we can talk about. But you can see how just a little wording, one word, you could make a big difference. Some people will be upset with you if you say, how many Muslims are there in the world? 1 billion Muslims, 2 billion Muslims, Allah knows. I don't know. I've never checked. I've never counted. Nobody's checked. And the guy asking you, he's never checked. Nobody really counted anybody. But we just, and if I'm talking to the kuffar and they're asking, I'm trying to say to them, look, you don't want to go to war with over 2 billion Muslims. I'm trying to scare him. I'm not going to say to him, yeah, I know 2 Muslims. You should be. He's not going to be scared of you. But people will say to you, how can you say there are 2 billion Muslims in the world? They are all mushrik. You make takfir al-mushrikeen. You see? So some people pull up on even the smallest word. So you need to be so accurate, so careful in what you say. So what are these terms? Kafir asli. Okay? Kafir asli. The word kafir refers to the one who covers something up. You say Allah described the kuffar, or the farmers in the Quran. Allah mentioned the kuffar as farmers, or farmers as kuffar, because they cover the seed with the ground, with the earth. They put the seed down and they cover it with the earth. So this is called the kafir covering it up. You have kufran al-ni'mah. You say the one who's kafir because they cover up the blessing of Allah or cover up the blessing. So they're ungrateful. The one who's not grateful, they don't say thank you. The one who does not show gratitude, he is covering up the blessing that they've got. You know? Describe the women who are ungrateful to their husbands as they are what? As kufr, as ungratefulness, not as the kufr makes them a disbeliever. So this is linguistically what the word kufr or kafir is referring to. In relation to Islam, we are talking about the one who does not believe in the religion of Islam. That is called kafir. Is not what some people they think it means. Mulhid, atheist. They think if you don't believe in God, then you're a kafir. But some Jews and Christians, they believe in God, so you can't call them kafir. No, the Jews and Christians don't believe in Islam. Therefore, they are kafir. It's not about if you believe in God or you don't believe in God. Most people believed in God. The Quraysh believed in God. They believed in Allah. But they believed Allah had daughters. And they believed in 300 idols as well. And worshipped those instead of Allah. So instead of having monotheism, instead of having tawheed, only worshipping Allah exclusively, they started to make idols and worship the idols instead of worshipping Allah. So you see, it's not the issue about believing in Allah or not. So the kafir asli is the one who was born from a kafir family, to parents who were Jews and Christians. The Prophet ﷺ said, كل مولود يولد على الفطرة. Every newborn child is born on the fitrah. The fitrah of what? Of tawheed. So we are born with the tawheed. We are born knowing Allah is one. We are not ignorant about that. And this is one thing we should be clear from this. Understand, nobody can be ignorant about tawheed because we are born with the knowledge of tawheed. We are born on the tawheed. That is our starting point. That is our starting point. Every newborn child is born with the tawheed. Then he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, but his parents make them Jews or Christians or fire worshippers. Okay? So the parents make them Jews or Christians or fire worshippers. So if you are born to Jewish parents, you are a Jew. You are kafir asli. You are Jewish. If you are born to Christian parents, you are Christian. You are kafir asli. If you are born to Hindu parents, you are Hindu. Then you are kafir asli. Okay, so that's what makes somebody kafir asli. And even though they were born in the tawheed, but they became mushrik because of their parents. They are attributed to that. If when they become mature, they start to be even, before they mature, even when they started to, should be able to show discernment and they started to declare the shahada, we'll call them Muslim. We'll say that they're Muslim. But otherwise, they'll be attributed to their own parents. Okay, attributed in particular to the father. But in general, to the parents, they will be attributed to their own religion. So that is the kafir asli. Okay, so this is the original non-Muslim. Okay, born to kafir parents. Okay, and kafir, disbelievers, okay, or the kafir, is two types. So I'm going to rub this out, inshallah. This is what a Muslim is. Muslim is the one who does this. And so what is the kafir? Kafir is two types. Kafir asli, okay, or murtad. Okay, so the kafir asli is the one born to non-Muslim parents. Okay. Is that an excuse for them? Even on the day of judgment, is it an excuse for them? No, because they were born on the fitrah. They were born with the knowledge of tawheed. They were born already testifying to the tawheed. Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Anfal. Okay, Surah Anfal. No, I think Surah A'raf, sorry. Yeah, Surah A'raf, verse 172. Okay, so Surah 7 verse 172. Okay, Surah 7 verse 172. Allah Ta'ala says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ. Allah said, and look, when Allah brought forward all the children of Adam from the back of Adam, and He made them testify to themselves, testify against themselves. أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ, am I not your only Lord? Am I not your Lord? قَالُوا بَلَا شَهِدْنَا. And they said, all of them said, all of the children of Adam, all of humankind, in one place, Allah brought them before we were born in this life. And we testified, indeed, we testify. أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. In case you came on the day of judgment claiming, we didn't know about that. So nobody can go on the day of judgment claiming, I didn't know about the Tawheed. I didn't know Allah was my Lord to be worshipped exclusively. I thought it was, Lat or Uzza. I thought it was the cross or Jesus. They can't do that. They can't say that. And if that wasn't enough, people will say, Akhi, but what about people? It's not their fault. They were born to non-Muslim parents. Their parents are the ones who convinced them. You're going to punish them because of their parents? Or you're talking about even after they grew up and became adult and they could think for themselves? Why do they stick to what their parents told them when it's obviously not the truth? أو تقولوا إنما أشرك آباؤنا من قبل وكنا ذرية من بعدهم أفتهلكنا بما فعل المبطلون. Allah said, or, okay, so they said either they'll make an excuse, we didn't know about it, or they will say, it was just our parents that were mushrik. It was our parents that became mushrik, that committed the shirk before us. And we were just their children after them. Are you going to destroy us because of what those mushrikeen did, what those evil people did? You see, on the day of judgment, they'll be cursing their own parents, for making them mushrikeen. So, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Allah said, this is how we explain to you our verses so that you can return to them. So this is Surah 172 to 173. Put there, inshallah. Okay, or 174 even. What we recited there. Okay. So those who are born to non-Muslim parents, they are not excused. And on the day of judgment, they cannot claim we didn't know. That is not an excuse for them. It's not an excuse for them in this life, nor is it an excuse for them in the hereafter. To say we didn't know that Allah should be worshipped, it was just our parents that told us that, is not good enough. And if it's not an excuse for them, what about the one who definitely knew and testified to it even in this life and said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, and then he worshipped other than Allah? How can he have an excuse for ignorance? Could he have an excuse for ignorance? For the same thing, we don't give excuse to those Jews and Christians. Are we going to give that excuse to now somebody who is supposed to be Muslim? Or somebody who says with his tongue, Allah is the only one who should be worshipped, followed and obeyed. Then he worships, follows and obeys somebody else. Okay, so that's the question. So now you have the second type of kafir, which is the murtad. Okay, the murtad. So the murtad are those who used to be Muslim then committed apostasy. Okay, became disbelievers. Okay, also we'll put here, then became disbelievers. Okay, then became disbelievers. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that some of the examples of these in Surah there's one verse a couple of verses I want to bring here. One is in Surah 5 verse 54, Surah Ma'idah verse 54, and the other one is Surah Tawbah verse 66. So, I'm going to put those on the board channel quickly. So Surah Tawbah verse 66 and Surah 5 verse 54. Okay, when Allah Ta'ala mentioned about the murtad. Allah Ta'ala says about those who mock Islam, He said, لا تعتذروا قد كفرتم بعد إيمانكم. He said, don't make excuses. You are disbelievers after you had Iman. Okay, so after you used to have Iman, after you used to be believers, then you became disbelievers. That's Surah Tawbah verse 66. And the other one, Surah Ma'idah verse 54, Allah Ta'ala warned us. He said, يا أيها الذين آمنوا من يرتد منكم عن دينه فسوف يأتي الله بقوم يحبهم ويحبونه. He said, oh you who believe, whoever apostates from his deen, turns back from his deen, Allah will replace you with people who love Him, or Allah loves them and they love Him. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So, murtad. So this is the second term over here as well. Okay. The apostate. Okay, so apostate, this is from the term, to go turn back, to slide back, or to go back, to revert back to something. So when somebody, he was upon the kufr, after he entered Islam, he reverted back to his kufr. He went back to the kufr. Or somebody who was a Muslim and he turned away from Islam, turned back from Islam, turned his back on Islam, became an apostate. And it's the way the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man baddala deenahu faqtuluh." The one who changes his religion, whoever changes his religion, then execute him. Then he has capital punishment. Okay, obviously after you offer him to repent and so on. So the kafir asli, we can put them as three types. Okay, put them as three types, and they are all mushrik. Okay, so three types of mushrik. Three types of mushrik. Okay, which is kafir asli. And I should stress here as well, what I'm talking about here is classification. Just like some of these terms, they are just classification by the scholars. They are not necessarily all Sharia terms found in the Quran and the Sunnah. Sometimes is what the ulama, they define and use to explain the people, to categorize the things, to help you understand, to help make it easier for you to digest the information. Like when we talk about the words wajib, mandub, mubah, makruh, these terms are not things which are defined by the Sharia specifically, by text. It's classification by the ulama. And that's why people can have different opinions about it. You don't need to use the same terms. Okay? People have different terminology. So you got here, mushrik from people of the book, okay, i.e. Jews, Christians, mushrik not from the people of the book, okay, e.g. Hindus, Sikhs, Greeks, etc. Okay. Number 3, atheists. Called atheist mushriks, I put here. Because people misunderstand. People think if he's atheist, he's not mushrik. No, if he's atheist, he's the biggest mushrik of all. He's the worst of all the mushrikeen. The atheist, he worships himself and he gives all the rights of Allah to himself. He's the one like Fir'aun. He's the biggest taghut of all. He's the one who said, there is no God except for me. He says to the people, I'm going to go to the heaven and see if there's a God of Musa, but I think he's lying. There's no God. He said, I am your highest Lord. I decide that legal and illegal, lawful and unlawful. I am the highest judge. Come to me with your disputes. He is the worst of all. Okay, so atheist mushriks, they're including here. We're talking about here the secular, communists. Okay? People forget these things are, these people, communists, socialists, they are the atheists. Okay? There are people who worship themselves. Okay? Humanists, they call themselves, some of them. Okay? They call themselves humanists, meaning they worship the human. They don't think they're worshiping them, but of course they're worshiping them. They like to run away from the term religion. But this is a religion. Or it's a deen. We don't need to use the term religion. English is just not good enough to deal with these things. They have a deen. Their deen it is to worship themselves, worship human beings. Let human beings follow the follow each other, worship each other, and make their own laws and decide what is right and wrong and so on. So these are all of these are disbelievers. Okay? These are all disbelievers. And in general, anybody, any one of them, anybody who does not believe in Islam, they are called a kafir. And they could be a kafir in this life, as far as we can see, judging by the apparent, and kafir on the hereafter as well. Or it could be, we see them as kafir in this life, but perhaps there's something which saves them from the hellfire in the hereafter. For example, they didn't commit the shirk. So you have something called Ahlul Fatra, the people who never, in between the prophets, who never heard or reached the knowledge of any of the prophets. Those are people who they'll be accounted differently. And it depends really if they stuck to their fitrah of the tawheed, or if they start committing the shirk, and Allah will deal with them however He wishes. But if anybody heard of Islam from all of these, and they didn't believe in Islam, then they are disbelievers. They have no excuse. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever hears my name and did not believe on me, has no excuse on the day of judgment." He has no excuse on the day of judgment. So that is, in other words, anybody who does not believe in the messengership of Muhammad ﷺ, they are called kafir asli. Okay, or they are called kafir. If they are born into that and they never entered Islam in their life, then they are called kafir asli. The kafir murtad, you can divide it up into 3 types. And again, this is just classification. It doesn't really matter if you want to use these terms or want to use something else. The first one is the jahid. Okay, so jahid. And over here, we have this word over here, jahid. Okay, so jahid is anybody who, one who denies anything Allah revealed. Okay, so they could deny the whole Quran, they could deny part of the Quran, they could deny the existence of the angels, for example, when Allah said in the Quran the angels exist. They could deny the messengers, despite Allah saying in the Quran, in the Revelation, that the messengers were sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They could deny a particular hukum, a particular ruling. If it's something known from Islam by necessity, not open to ijtihad, so something which is a clear cut in the Quran, and they deny it, then they are disbelievers. Allah Ta'ala said, وَمَا يَجْحَدُ بِآيَاتِنَا إِلَّا الْكَافِرُونَ. Okay, so this is Surah Ankabut. I'll give you the surah, inshallah, this verse. Okay, so Surah Ankabut. Second, inshallah. Everything okay? Okay. Okay, Surah 29, verse 47. Okay, Surah 29, verse 47. So, yeah, Allah Ta'ala says, nobody denies our verses except for the disbelievers. Except for the disbelievers. So it could be that somebody, he entered Islam, embraced Islam, but he just could not accept something from the Quran, despite Allah revealing it to him. So, for example, he could not accept the prohibition of alcohol, for example. So he said, no, it's not. It can't be right. That can't be true. Or the duty of jihad. He said, no, I deny it. It's not fard. Jihad is not fard. Jihad is haram. This type of thing. Or he says, you don't have to pray. Nobody needs to pray. Or he says, no, the paradise is not real. Jannah is not real. The one who denies the verses of Allah, contradicting clearly, is like the one basically he's making what's called takdeeb. Juhud, takdeeb means he's saying it's not true. Okay? Like if I say to you, brother, so and so, Shaykh, he has two wives. And he said, no, brother, that's not true. So you deny it, you disbelieve me. Basically, you're saying to me, I'm wrong. I got it wrong. Or even worse, I'm a liar. Okay? This is called takdeeb. Okay? The way we have tasdeeq. Tasdeeq means I believe what you're saying is the truth. Takdeeb is the opposite of that. Means I believe what you're saying is not true. I believe it's a lie. I believe it's falsehood. It's wrong. Okay, so we say sadaq. We say sadaq Allah. Some people say sadaq Allah al-Adim. They say Allah, spoken the truth. So basically, when you make takdeeb or juhud, you're saying kazab Allah. Allah lied. That's what you're saying. So when Allah said alcohol is haram, okay, or Allah said salah 5 times a day is fard. You must pray 5 times a day. And somebody comes along and says, nope, it's not true. He is saying Allah lied. Allah got it wrong. And that is called juhud, is kufr. Okay? It's called kufr. The second one, mustahil. Okay? And that's over here. Mustahil. He makes istihlal. That means he's one who makes halal, okay, i.e. legalizes, put it this way, what Allah made haram. And obviously this is what the Jews and Christians did, the rabbis and priests did, and Allah called them طاغوت because of that. In Surah Tawbah verse 31, Allah Ta'ala says, اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. They took their rabbis and priests as lords instead of Allah. Why? Because they made halal whatever Allah made haram, and haram whatever Allah made halal. So that is what made them mushrikeen and taghut. And the people obeyed them. Okay? They are one unit. The rabbis and those who obeyed them, they're together. They are all mushrikeen. And then you have, the rulers and the tawaghit. When they start to legalize things and they say, actually, Allah said that we should prohibit and make it illegal for people to gamble and to have brothels and to have adultery and pornography. But I say it's legal. I say it's okay. So it's okay. Just get a license from me, permission, and we'll give you permission to do that. That is called istihlal. That's called istihlal. It's called legalizing what Allah made haram, which is known from Islam and necessity, clear-cut matters. Not a matter of ijtihad, matter of direct contradiction to what Allah Subhanahu has prohibited. The third one is, we say, naqid. Okay. So naqid mean, okay, this is the one who denies, denier, legalizer, and naqid, the one who negates. Okay. So the third one is if he commits or he does one of the negations of the Iman. And you'll see we can take from Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab's 10 negations of Iman as a summary of those. Whoever commits one of those 10 negations of Iman, then he has nullified his Islam. After he had Islam, he committed those and he became therefore a murtad, an apostate, okay, or a kafir or mushrik again because of that. Okay, so That's what the term naqid. So we have here nawaqid. I put here nawaqid. So these are the negations. Okay? So the way you have something that will negate your wudu, something will nullify your wudu. You had wudu, you went to the toilet. You don't have wudu anymore. You had iman. You worshipped an idol, you don't have iman anymore. This is the way the naqid works. So certain actions you do will nullify and negate your iman. You don't have this special protection. Once you say the kalima, after that you can never become kafir. It's not like that. Rather, the Prophet ﷺ said there will come a time with a fitna where a man, he will go in the evening as a believer and by the morning he's a kafir. He'll wake up in the morning as a believer and by the evening he's a kafir. So you see, so easy for somebody to come in and out of Islam. So the way you enter Islam with one word, by saying Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, you become kafir by one word as well. So easy like that. So if somebody commits one of those negations, in this case we're talking about negations of iman. Okay, if you commit one of those negations of iman, you will therefore leave the fold of Islam. You become from the murtaddeen. Okay, you become from the apostates. So now, the question is really, and I'm not going to go into the 10 negations today. I want to look at some of these other terms, inshallah, here as well. Okay, so the kafir, we said here is, I mentioned the word kafir here. Okay, one who is not Muslim. Okay, it's not a swear word. Okay, the one who disbelieves in something. Okay, so the kafir, when we just mention the word kafir like this, your mind should go to somebody who disbelieves in Islam. And there's no harm for somebody to say the word the other way around. I am a disbeliever in Christianity. I don't believe in it. I'm a kafir in Christianity. I'm proud of it. No problem. I'm a kafir in Hinduism. Alhamdulillah. And they are kafir in Islam. They're disbelievers in Islam. There's nothing to be ashamed of about using these terms. Okay. So now, what about takfeer? Where does takfeer come into it? At takfeer, one thing we should remember, and this is quite an important point we should remember. Remember I said to you some terms are not Sharia terms from the Quran and the Sunnah. It's just terms used by the scholars to classify things, to help us understand, to help us to digest the information easier. At-takfeer is not a term found in the Quran and the Sunnah. It's not a term even used by the Salaf. Okay? And I don't mean by the Salaf somebody who died yesterday. I'm talking about the Salaf, the Sahaba, the companions. And if I want to say further, in the first 3 generations, the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, and the Tabi'een. They never used this term, takfeer. Does that mean the concept did not exist? No, of course it existed. Of course it existed. But the term takfeer is not one of those terms. And from some of these terms here, this word takfeer, I'm going to highlight which ones sort of came later. This issue of takfeer is new. It's a new term. Okay? When we talk about AlAATHIR, is a new term. Talk about al-udhr bil-jahl is a new term. Jahlul hal is a new term. Okay? Even these terms, adam al-qasad, irtifa' al-qasad, to some extent even tasleel. The term itself, these are new terms. So don't get confused. And the thing about new terms is that different scholars, they will define them in different ways. And they will use them in different ways. So when this scholar talks about takfeer, he's talking about one thing. And when that scholar uses the word takfeer, he's talking about something else. And then when the students start to fight each other and debate with each other, they get confused. Because they're saying, Akhi, this is takfeer. And he's thinking, no, that's not how my shaykh explained it. But actually, they said the same thing. Okay? For example, takfeer, literally, it can mean, linguistically, it can literally mean either you make somebody kafir, or it can mean that you call somebody kafir. Okay? You are declaring or claiming somebody is kafir. That is what takfir could mean. Okay? So somebody will use the word takfir in relation to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, whoever says to his brother, ya kafir, O kafir, then it is as if he killed him. Or that one of them is a kafir. The kufr will come back to one of them. So this, this hadith is talking about dispraising the one who calls a Muslim kafir out of anger, out of desires, out of, is arguing with him, hizbiyah, whatever reason, without there being any real grounds for that kufr, for that takfir. So this is called takfir. So somebody will say, akhi, that's called takfir. Don't do it. Beware of takfir. Akhi, don't ever make takfir. Takfir is haram. Because he's talking about that issue. Because that hadith, technically, what did he say? He never used the word takfir in the hadith. But he said in the hadith, whoever says to his Muslim brother, you're a kafir. Okay? That could be called takfir. Because, takfir means to call somebody kafir. To say, so-and-so is a kafir. Okay? That's called takfir. Okay? But does it mean that nobody can ever become kafir and you can't call them kafir? No. The Prophet ﷺ, he called Musaylima an apostate, kafir. He's somebody who embraced Islam. And then he said, no, I'm a prophet as well. And Muhammad ﷺ said, no, he's Musaylima kadhab, the liar. Yeah? And he's an apostate. So, is there apostasy? Yes. That's also called takfir, but it's not dispraised. There's nothing wrong with that. So you have these two types. So one scholar will start talking about, what the ulama used to say. Whoever did not make takfir on the mushrikeen, they are kafir. And the other one saying, akhi, don't make takfir. Takfir is bad. Takfir is evil. Because he's talking about the hadith about the one who calls Muslim kafir. And he's talking about, he must make takfir. He's talking about takfir on the mushrikeen. And that's what ulama said. Other ulama, when they use the word takfir, in this context, they're absolutely correct. Other people that will say, the takfir, akhi, takfir only talks about an apostate. It's not about the Jews and Christians. Not about the mushrikeen. They say, no, akhi, when we talk about takfir, we're not talking about Jews and Christians. Because they will say to your brother, do you make takfir on the mushrikeen? He said, no, brother, there's nothing called takfir on mushrikeen. Because the mushrikeen, they're already kafir. We only make takfir on a Muslim if he becomes an apostate. So in their mentality of those scholars, you only talk about takfir in relation to apostate, the murtad, not about these ones. Okay? Which one is correct? They're all correct, because it's a matter of classification. When you classify the terms, the new terms, it is permissible to use the terms, any terms you like, as long as you don't confuse or change the subject matter. So as long as it's explained properly, and you don't confuse between the two. He says, don't make takfir, akhi. But he also says, but you must call the Jews and Christians kafir. And he also says, but you must call as well an apostate kafir. He's not denying that. But he's just saying, don't make takfir of hawa. And again, this word takfir of hawa, okay, perhaps that's the term that I use. Other people don't use that term. Maybe they just call it takfir. So this is classification, it can confuse people. And this is one of the most important things. Especially this term here, AlAATHIR, is one which has confused a lot of people who saying the same thing but using different terms. And some people, they are trying to insist that you need to use my words. You have to use my terminology, otherwise I don't accept it. And that's wrong. Okay? I'll give you another example of how this terminology can make a problem. Imagine now you went to a Shafi'i scholar and said, Sheikh, what's the hukum of jihad? We have occupation Muslim lands all over the world, kuffar entering our lands. Palestine being occupied for how many decades? Chechnya been occupied, Andalus been occupied, Kashmir is occupied. And what's the hukum of jihad? We say to you, brother, the jihad is wajib. We cannot leave it. We must fight the jihad. It is wajib upon us. Compulsory obligation, cannot be ignored. So then he went to a Hanafi scholar. Okay, so this is the Shafi'i scholar. Shafi'i scholar said it's wajib. He went to the Hanafi scholar and said, Sheikh, Sheikh so-and-so said that the jihad is wajib. This Hanafi scholar will say, he's a liar. In fact, whoever says that the jihad is wajib is kafir. The jihad is fard. Why? Because in Hanafi fiqh, word wajib is below fard. So both of the, and in Shafi'i fiqh, it doesn't use the word fard, they use the word wajib. And there's nothing in between. Wajib and fard are the same thing, but they use different terms. And he uses the word wajib to mean one thing, and he uses the word wajib to mean something else. And both of them will say, anybody who doubts that the jihad is wajib, he was kafir. This is what the Shafi'i scholar will say. And the other Hanafi scholar will say, anybody who doubts, anybody who says that the jihad is wajib only instead of calling it fard is kafir. Why? Because both of them want to say, you must fight the jihad. And the students will start fighting each other and say, your shaykh's kafir. Why? Because they're not thinking and understanding how the scholars are using this terminology. And these terms, they can be defined and classified any way that they like. Okay? So the word takfir, if you want to use it in all senses, you could say that it is to basically is to call, to declare those who committed what negates the iman, to declare them as a kafir. That could be the kafir asli, that they are mushrik to begin with, and so they are not Muslim. Or it could be an apostate because he left Islam, so he became an apostate. That's also called takfir. And it could be takfir hawa, the one who didn't really deserve it, but somebody called him to takfir out of anger or of arrogance or partisan, without to have any real verification or anything else. This is also called takfir, but called a dispraised takfir. So the takfir could be praised and it could be dispraised. Okay? So this is what the takfir really is. If I leave it like that, is to call somebody kafir. To call someone kafir. Okay? And that could be ijtihad, or it could be hawa, desires, and sin. Okay, so it could be either of those. Okay, so it could be somebody who did it out of ijtihad properly, and so it could be somebody who did it out of hawa, out of his desires, and that was a sin. Okay. What are mawani' of takfir? Mawani' of takfir. Mawani' of takfir refers to preventions of takfir. Okay, preventions of takfir. Okay, and even you could put in brackets here excuses. Sometimes there could be excuses, sometimes there might not be excuses, but they're called preventions of takfir, mawani' of takfir. What is a mani'? For those who studied the usul, what is a mani'? Definition. Okay? Now the mani' or mawani' of takfir is a prevention of takfir, or mani' in general is the matter which its presence necessitates the absence of the rule. So something which, because of this issue, the rule must be prevented. So when you talk about mawani' of takfir, the preventions of takfir, means if that issue is present, we need to hold back from the takfir. Okay, we need to hold back from the takfir. Okay, so that's called preventions of takfir. So that could be many things. It could be because of ignorance, could be because of interpretation, it could be because of duress, because he was insane, because he was a child, not mature, because he was sleepwalking or talking in his sleep. All of these circumstances mean we need to hold back from calling him a kafir because of this action. It could be other things. He's a new Muslim, living far away from the Muslims. All these circumstances need to be looked into. Sometimes they are valid prevention of takfir, sometimes they're not valid prevention of takfir. Sometimes people make up preventions of takfir. They say, oh, he's blind. Blind is not a prevention of takfir. Okay? Being blind does not prevent takfir upon somebody. And there are many blind apostates in the past that have been executed by the khulafa. It's nothing new. So, it's something which is about the person or about the circumstances, which means you must hold back from the takfir. Does that mean they're not kafir? Not necessarily. Maybe they are kafir, but you are not necessarily allowed to call them kafir because of that prevention of takfir. Because, for example, if he's under duress, his actions and statements from his tongue no longer take him out the fold of Islam. They no longer count. But in his heart, if he's full of iman, then he's a believer. And if he's accepting the kufr with his heart, then he's the disbeliever. But you can't see his heart. So the one under duress who's committing kufr, he may or may not be a kafir. Only Allah knows. Because only Allah knows what's in the heart. But you cannot call him kafir because you cannot tell that from the apparent. All you can see from the apparent is he's doing kufr actions under duress. And under duress, the kufr doesn't count. La ikraha fi din. The way Islam does not count under duress, kufr does not count under duress. The deen is not something which is measured under duress. You force somebody, become Muslim or I will kill you. If you say that to somebody and they embrace Islam, it doesn't count. If when he's free he left it, we won't call him apostate. We'll say he's kafir asli, he never really entered Islam in the first place. Nobody should ever have even forced him. And the same thing, if you put a gun to somebody's head and say, no, commit kufr, make sujood to an idol, pray to this grave, otherwise I will kill you. Even if he did it, that doesn't make him a kafir. It doesn't count. But if in his heart he loved it, he will become kafir. But only Allah knows that. So this mention obviously about the duress issue, okay, is mentioned in Surah Nahl, verse 106. Surah 16, verse 106. Allah says, "Man kafara billahi min ba'di imanihi, illa man ukriha wa qalbuhu mutma'innun bil iman." He said, whoever disbelieved in Allah after they had iman, except for the one who is under duress. So you see now there's exceptions. So there are exceptions. He said, under the duress. وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ, and his heart was full of iman. But you don't know what's in his heart. Nobody can see inside the heart, except for Allah. وَلَكِنْ مَنْ شَرَحَ بِالْكُفْرِ صَدْرًا فَعَلَيْهِمْ غَضَبٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. He said, but the one whose heart, his chest, was happy with the kufr, then he will be cursed by Allah, and the anger of Allah will be on him, and a severe punishment. So in other words, even under the duress, if your heart was accepting of it, you become kafir. But only Allah knows about that. So the prevention of takfir is not about declaring that this person is innocent or not, or that the person is excused in front of Allah or not. But it's a matter of purifying your takfir to make sure you do not fall into making takfir of hawa. Is to purify your ijtihad in declaring somebody a kafir or not, to be free from any defect or any doubt or anything which could be misunderstood, or which could be a form of your own partisan. Because otherwise, if you're making takfir without proper grounds, when they could have an excuse or there could be an exception to it, then it could be that you only made takfir out of your own hatred for the person, or out of your own partisan because you don't like his group, or you don't like their group. He didn't give bay'ah to you, you didn't give bay'ah to his shaykh or whatever. So because of that, you start making takfir upon each other. If that's the case, it's wrong. So to purify your takfir, and to purify myself in front of Allah, to say, oh Allah, I'm innocent of making wrong takfir, out of my own nafs and hawa, I only did it for your sake because of the clear evidences in front of me. Therefore, he stops from making takfir if he sees one of these preventions of takfir, one of these excuses, if it's valid. And in each one, he'll investigate as well. Is it real duress or not? Is it real ignorance or not? Is that ignorance valid for this type of kufr or not? Because not for every type of kufr you can have ignorance. Okay, you can't, like we said, we can't excuse the Jews and Christians for their ignorance, because when they worship the cross. No. And if a Muslim worship the cross, you're going to give him excuse of ignorance? You should know even better. He should be better than the Christian to know you can't worship the cross. So, with the prevention of takfir, you will look into it, investigate it as well. But that's what the preventions of takfir are about. Okay, again, it's not to say necessarily that because of that prevention, he is not kafir, but it's to say, I cannot pass that fatwa of kufr upon him. Just like a person is innocent until proven guilty, he could be guilty, but if there's no proof against him, you cannot give a verdict against him. You can't declare somebody a thief without witnesses. Maybe he was a thief, but you cannot declare it just unless you have evidence. You can't declare a woman or a man an adulterer without 4 witnesses. Even maybe he was, but nobody saw. But you can't accuse him of that. And in the same way with the takfir, he may well be kafir, but you cannot make the takfir if there is a valid prevention, a valid excuse, or prevention of takfir, mani of takfir for them. Okay, so this is mawani of takfir. What is the hujjah? The next one, hujjah. This is a very important term when we talk about this. And this is a better term for us to use than when we talk about al-udhr bil-jahl. Okay? Because al-hujjah is something which is found in the Quran and Sunnah. It's something which is mentioned in the Quran, mentioned in the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's a shar'i term, has specific divine meaning. Okay? So it refers to a binding argument, okay, argument based on evidences. That has no rebuttal. Okay? And I'll put in brackets here, excuse. Okay? Essentially, it's an argument. If you think about it in court, it is, you have a defense. You have an argument which is backed up by evidences, which is a defense against the accusations made against you. And that's what makes you have an excuse. That's why the hadith says about those who hear the name of Muhammad and don't believe in him, لا حجة لهم يوم القيامة. They have no excuse on the day of judgment. No argument, no defense on the day of judgment. They can have nothing to say to Allah on the day of judgment to say, this is why I shouldn't go to hellfire. Why? Because they heard, they had opportunity, but they didn't take it. So the hujjah is the binding argument based on evidences that has no rebuttal. You can't compete with it. Okay? Because somebody could make an argument, but you could say, well, no, that's wrong because of so-and-so evidences. So the hujjah, one that has no rebuttal. So the hujjah could be something for you or against you. Okay? The hujjah could be for you or against you. So if the hujjah is presented to you, the evidence, the argument is presented to you, and you hear it, and you still disbelieve, then you have no excuse on the day of judgment. You can't say on the day of judgment, how was I supposed to know? Because so-and-so told you. So-and-so showed you. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came with the Quran. He recited it to you, his verses, the verses of Allah. And you knew that they were miraculous. You saw that they were miraculous. You heard the truth, but you chose not to believe in it. So now what excuse do you have on the day of judgment? So that is what the hujjah is about. If the hujjah reaches you or not. And then you have these two things here. Iqamatul hujjah and bayanul hujjah. Iqamatul hujjah meaning establishing. Okay, the argument. I'll put here. Okay, so like we said, if that hujjah, that argument is made to you, is presented to you, you have no excuse on the day of judgment. And Allah Ta'ala said about that, وَمَا كُنَّ مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. He said, we will never punish people until we send to them a messenger. I mean, until we establish a hujjah against them, in other words. Okay, so I'll find you this verse, inshallah. Surah 17, verse 15. Okay, Surah 17, verse 15. And there's another verse we want here as well, inshallah. Surah 4, verse 165 as well. Okay. Surah 4, verse 165. Inshallah Ta'ala says that Allah sent messengers, رُسُلًا مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ لِأَلَّا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى اللَّهِ حُجَّةٌ بَعْدَ الرُّسُلِ. He said that Allah sent the messengers with the glad tidings and the warnings so that mankind has no hujjah, excuse or argument or defense against Allah after the messengers came. Okay? So in other words, the messengers were sent to the people to establish the hujjah against them. One of the aims of the prophets and messengers was iqamatul hujjah, establishing the hujjah. He conveyed to them, and then after that, they chose to disbelieve, and they have no excuse left after that. Okay, so this is called iqamatul hujjah, establishing the argument or establishing the proof. Okay, argument or proof we'll put here, against the people. Bayan al-hujjah is explaining or presenting the argument, okay, or the hujjah basically. What is the difference between these two? It's quite an important difference between the two. Bayan al-hujjah is for you to present to the person yourself and say to them, here, look, this is the proof, explain it to you clearly. Iqamatul hujjah is the fact that it's been established, not necessarily by you. Okay? The hujjah reached him by whichever means, whichever way, and you called him kafir even though you never spoke to him. That could be the case. For example, the hujjah could be established by a scholar explaining the verses, presenting the evidences to the person, and so here is the evidences. Now how can you differ with that? That's one way. Especially in matters not known by necessity. Or it could be somebody was new Muslim as a child, they didn't know, they are living far away from the Muslims, so they just explained to them. So this is how we pray. We have to pray 5 times a day. And so it was explained to them. So it reached them. Or it could be the hujjah was the coming of the messengers themselves. Like the ayah said, after the messengers came, that was the hujjah. They heard Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that was the hujjah. They had no excuse after that. Why? Because what is known from Islam by necessity is the clear-cut, famous, agreed-upon matters. You don't need to be a mujtahid. You don't need to have, be hafiz of hadith. You don't need to have anything like that. Clear, known. Everybody, even the kuffar know Muslims don't drink alcohol. It's known. So the coming of the messengers, the revelation of the Quran, it was the establishing of the hujjah against the people in those clear-cut matters, except for very rare exceptions. And the tawheed, what about the tawheed? Allah established the hujjah against you. Remember we said before? When Allah, He brought everybody forward and He said, testify against yourself now. Am I not your only Lord? Is Allah not the only one who has worship? And they said, indeed, we testify. So the hujjah had been established against themselves already about the tawheed, about la ilaha illallah. That's already established. So nobody needs to explain to somebody, oh, you didn't know there was a God? Of course he knew there was a God. He knew there was a God. He knew Allah was the only legislator, the only Lord, the only creator. Allah, they know that. From your own fitrah, you know it. From your own mind, rationally, you can see it. And that's why many kuffar you find. Many kuffar in this country, they don't believe in Christianity anymore. They're fed up. But they can't shake the belief that there must be a creator. Because it's so obvious. Because it just doesn't make sense. You have to be really arrogant to be a true atheist. And this is just the case, as it is, just saying it as it is. To be an atheist, you have to be really arrogant. Because, and you have to be really irrational as well. Because any rational thinking person will understand you cannot have all of this around us and there not be a creator. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. That is not how things work. That is not the laws of nature. That is not the way reality is. Things do not happen by themselves. That just doesn't happen. So the tawheed, the hujjah has been established against you already by your own fitrah, by your own natural instinct from your birth. So you don't need to have bayan al-hujjah, explaining to somebody beforehand. You don't need to go to the king of Saudi Arabia and explain to him, look, let me explain to you. There is a God. He sent Muhammad as a messenger with the Quran and the Sharia, and Allah is the only legislator. You don't need to explain that to him. You don't need to explain all that to him. The fact that he took himself as a legislator instead of Allah, and he knows what Allah, and he's not ignorant anyway. He knows Allah legislated the law and Sharia, and he leaves it and he implements Sharia, kufr law instead. That is his kufr. He has hujjah established against him already. You don't need to explain to him. Okay. So the other terms. At-tawaqquf, at-tathabbut. At-tathabbut is what? Verification. And this is very important. Very important. Okay? And you see here, we have a question. And this is an important question. And we are going to continue with this next week as well. So you'll be able to get more information, inshallah, about what we're talking about this. On these issues of iqamatul hujjah, is agreed that you don't make takfeer upon somebody until the hujjah has been established. That is what is being mentioned. That's what the ulama said. And some ulama will say it in general like this without to clarify further. Others will go into more detail. And they will explain, like I've explained, that simple things like tawheed, whether somebody heard about Islam or not, they are called a kafir in this life, as far as this life is concerned. They are called kuffar. And if they are committing shirk in Allah, then they have no excuse for that. Even if there was nobody who came along to explain the hujjah. Why? Because the hujjah been established by Allah, by the fitrah. Okay? But still we say in general, we never make takfir upon somebody unless a hujjah has been established. Okay? Unless a hujjah has been established. Why do the kafir asli, why are the kafir asli called kuffar, even if they never heard about Islam? Why? Because they don't believe in Islam. They don't believe in the religion of Islam. And the fitrah is a testimony against them for their own shirk that they're committing. And it could be that they're muwahhideen in this life, and they never committed shirk, but they never believed in Islam. And on the day of judgment, Allah could deal with them how they like. But as far as this world is concerned, this dunya is concerned, they just believe in Islam. They don't believe in Islam. So they are not called Muslims. They are called kuffar. You can only have those two. There's no third. Either Muslim or they are kafir. So at-tathabbut is essential for that reason. One of the reasons. To make sure that the hujjah has been established. And one of the ways you can make sure of that is by making bayan al-hujjah. If you're not sure if the hujjah reached him, tell him the hujjah. Now you've got no more excuse. Remove any excuse. If you didn't know, okay, now I'll tell you. Now you know. So this is why you have bayan al-hujjah. To check as well, verify that there are no mawani' of takfir. There are no possible preventions of takfir. There are no possible things which would halt and stop you from making takfir. There is nothing that could suggest maybe he's innocent. He didn't do it. People get accused of things all the time. People accuse each other of being Mossad agent, MI5 agent, CIA agent all the time. Before you start worrying about, does he have a mawani' of takfir? He never did it in the first place. Before you start looking at mawani' of takfir, does he have a hujjah or not? Check if he's even guilty of the crime. No? If I just accuse somebody, any old person, Zayd bin Ubaid, he's a thief. I hope so nobody's called Zayd here. Okay? I always use that name. One day I'm going to meet somebody called Zayd bin Ubaid, I'm going to say, I'm sorry. Zayd bin Ubaid, he's a thief, He's a thief. So now we need to check, does it meet the conditions to cut the hands of the thief? Is it quarter of din? Before you go to the conditions, check if he stole anything or not. Who told you he stole anything? You don't just believe a rumor. You need to have proof that they actually committed the crime. Then you talk about preventions or not. At-tawaqquf. At-tawaqquf is holding back or putting something on hold. We say on hold. Okay? Tawaqquf means to stop. It's to stop. We say sometimes we talk about tawaqquf in relation to certain ilm, certain knowledge, where we say we stop at the text, at tawqif. So we say, for example, people they talk about Khidr alayhi salam. They say, is he a prophet or not? Dhul Qarnayn, is he a prophet or not? So Dhul Qarnayn, some people said he's a prophet. Some people say no, he's not a prophet. There's no proof that he's a prophet. So we say about Dhul Qarnayn, as we mentioned as well in the hadith, that we make tawaqquf, we stop. We neither say he is, neither we say he isn't. We say we don't know. Could be, couldn't be. So tawaqquf is a way of saying I don't know. It's a form of tafweed, a form of putting it pending to say I leave it to Allah. Allah alone knows. I don't know the situation. So that could be the situation. MashaAllah. Could be there's somebody, you see him on the kufr, but there's a big doubt in your mind about something about the reality. If he has excuse or not. Is he guilty or not? Until you can check and verify further, you say, I don't know, I can't answer. Somebody asks you, is he kafir? But I need to check further. No, is he kafir? But I just need to check, let me investigate. Is he kafir? I only met him yesterday, let me just check. Give me at least 1 day, at least 3 days. But is he kafir or Muslim? You have to tell me now. Has to be one or the other. Which one is it, akhi? When are you going to call him kafir? Are you going to make takfir? You have some people like this. So brother, you just told me, and why am I going to take your word for it in the first place? People told me, this sheikh says tahakum to the taghut is allowed, that sheikh said it's allowed, this sheikh said voting is allowed. I said, why should I believe you? Just because you claim it's true, you want me to make takfir upon that? Based on some hearsay? I don't do that. I don't make takfir like this. You claim it's true, maybe it's not true. And many times I found that when I check, actually wasn't true in the first place at all. Not true at all. So, at-tawaqquf is to be on hold, to put something on hold. And that could be different types as well. You could have different types of tawaqquf. Obviously, I'm not going to detail any of these. I'm just introducing all these terms for you, just to give you a glossary. So when I use them next week, inshallah, you should recognize the terms easily. So tawaqquf, it could be the tawaqquf of the Mu'tazila, which is complete bid'ah. What they used to say is, he's neither Muslim nor kafir. He's manzil bayna manzilatayn. He's in a special place between the two places. This is a complete bid'ah, misguidance. This one is rejected. This type of tawaqquf, it is misguidance, dalala. It could be a tawaqquf of tayassur or tasayyur, or tayassur, to say, I'm taking it easy. Okay, the tawaqquf of holding back. For example, he believes he's kafir, but he doesn't want to say it. Okay, he believes he's kafir, but he doesn't want to say it. So that could be, for example, face to face with the person. You believe, oh my God, this person's kafir I'm talking to, but you want to give him da'wah. Because you want to give him da'wah, so you don't start to, beat him heavily with a stick and say, you kafir, you mushrik, come listen to me. So you believe it in your heart, you believe this person kafir, he left to follow Islam, he says some stuff, take him out of Islam. But let me guide him back to Islam. So I treat him gently. I don't need to mention the word, you're apostate. Nor do I need to give him salam or pray behind him either. But I don't necessarily need to spell it out to him, immediately. I can say, look, come on, this is what the ulama said before. That's what you really believe, isn't it? Come on, this is what we should believe in. This is what the ulama said. You think that we can be better? And then, alhamdulillah, when he comes out of that, and sometimes you can help people, you see. This way, you can help people. When somebody says something wrong, somebody says, Akhi, we have to obey the law of the land. Two ways you can deal with him. You can say to him, you're mushrik. And that's not going to get you anywhere. All it's going to do is, he's takfiri. He's never going to listen to you again. Or, you can say to him, Akhi, what you mean is, we obey the law of Allah, and if there's something which the kuffar say in this country, in their laws, which is permissible in Islam, does not disagree with Islam, then it's allowed for us to stop at the red light, for example, because Allah said it's permissible. And it's not a sin. That's what you mean, isn't it? You mean what the ulama said, that the customs of the people is permissible as long as it doesn't contradict Islam. That's what you mean. So you say, yeah, that's what I mean. So you save him from the kufr. Isn't that better? Instead of you immediately start to call him kafir, kafir, kafir. And if you have this habit of just always using the word, making takfir like this all the time, it's wrong. Okay? You won't be able to give da'wah. You won't be able to give them nasiha. It's better to be gentle with the person, and you can find that they will actually come out of what they're saying and respond to you much better. So that's another type of tawaqquf. But another type of tawaqquf of tayassur, of holding back, taking it easy, is out of fear. Out of, I'm afraid what would happen to me if I don't call them Muslim, or if I call them kuffar. This taghut regime is an apostate regime. If I call them apostates, they will deal with me harshly. They will put me in prison. They will arrest me. They will throw me out. They will kill me. Okay, for example. Some people, they will never face any of that. They'll face a lot less than that. But they're still afraid. Some people, they think, look, right now I have a government job, government salary, company car, company house. They have that. Some of the ulama in Saudi Arabia, they get treated by the government very, very well. They have all of this. Big, expensive car, paid for by the government. Big house, paid for by the government. Big salary, prizes, his name, people, they promote it everywhere. People say, look, refer to this sheikh, this is a good sheikh. We promote him, he's a good man. Then one day he says, but to rule by man-made law is kufr akbar, will take a person out of the fold of Islam, and in fact, what this regime is doing is not Islamic. Next day, he's got no house, he's got no car, he's got no salary. People say, his name's in the dirt, he said, don't listen to him anymore, he's an evil man, khawarij. What did they do? And they're talking about, there's a real case like this. He lost everything. So he came back and said, oh no, I made a mistake, it's okay. Of course it's Darul Islam, of course it's Shaykh al-Islam, of course he's Amir al-Mu'mineen. Okay, and that will happen. Somebody who does that is very serious. Okay, so there's obviously when he does that, it's no longer tawakkuf. Now he's made a decision, he's made to declare something that he's Muslim. But some people, they believe it's kafir, but they don't say it openly out of fear. That fear could be justified like somebody in prison under duress, or it could be somebody who's not under duress and he's just a coward because it was his duty to come out. And the ulama, the first one should be confronting the tawheed and calling the people, desert, ijtanib al-taghut, keep distance from this taghut. But when he doesn't do that, he does not fulfill the role of the ulama. So he can make that tawaqquf, and that is wrong. Okay, that out of the cowardice and that and the fear. Or it could be tawaqquf of at-tathabbut, tawaqquf of verification. Is not to say, I'm making an excuse for him, but say, hang on, before I jump to conclusions and make takfir of hawa, make takfir without verifying, maybe he was innocent all along. Before I do that, let me check, let me verify, let me investigate. That person not dispraised, as long as he doesn't take the mick, doesn't take it too far. His whole life investigating. Although having said that, I do this a lot as well. In many cases, I just don't investigate it because you're not obliged to check every single person. You're not obliged to check, to go door to door, verifying every single person. Okay, tell me what you've done. Tell me what excuse. You don't need to do that. Okay. So some people ask you, why didn't you make takfir on so and so? I didn't look into it. So why didn't you look into it? Because it's not fard upon me. I don't need to. I don't have to look into every single person and look for a reason to call them kafir. Maybe I'll find one, maybe I won't. But I don't need to look into that person. It's not important. Sometimes we do it because there's a specific need for that. Zindiq. The word zindiq, I'm just going down the list here. We've passed our time, I think. But let me just quickly go through the last. The last ones are very important ones, but I'll go into more detail next week, inshallah. But I'll quickly just give you a definition, inshallah. The word zindiq, it means apostate. It's a term originally from the Persian, but was used in the time of the Salaf as well, to refer to an apostate. In general, it means an apostate. But more specifically, people that use it to refer to an apostate that justifies his kufr with Islamic symbols, okay, or rules or verses. So, for example, like the one who says, brother, you have to ally with the kuffar against Muslims in their wars against Islam because Allah said, awfu bil uqud, fulfill your contracts. This is zandaqa. This is zandaqa. And there's fatwa like this. There's some crazy people who are giving this fatwa. These fatwa. Say, look, if a Muslim joins the British Army or the American Army and they tell him to bomb the Taliban in Afghanistan, he said he must do it because Allah said fulfill your contracts. That is zandaqa. The kufr akbar is justifying it, claiming that it's an Islamic thing to do. Okay? The Qadianis, if they try to claim that what they follow is Islam, their temples are masjid, that their book is the Quran or from Allah, then that's called zandaqa. If they call themselves like a Jew or a Christian, another religion, it's like they're just like a form of Hindu. Okay, fair enough, you're just like a Hindu. Don't claim you're Muslim. Because when you try to justify your kufr as Islam, you can become zindiq. AlAATHIR. And this is the really important points here, these ones. And this is what we are obviously really talking about. AlAATHIR refers to, and this is a very new term, and I want to stress this, it's a very new term. Okay? This term was not used before. It was not used before. The concept exists before. And if you stick to the original concept, you'll find nobody disagrees. Because on this issue, people, they start to call Dawla kafir. They start to call the many ulama kafir, mujahideen kafir, claiming that they are aadhir. And they mean by this, the one who excuses mushrikeen by ignorance. Okay? The word aadhir just means the one who gives excuse, the one who excuses something or somebody. That's all it means. But they're referring specifically to somebody who makes excuse for the mushrikeen by ignorance, by jahl, by al-udhr bil-jahl. Al-udhr bil-jahl is the next one here. Okay? Al-udhr bil-jahl means the excuse of ignorance. Okay, some of these terms you should memorize them, remember them, because they are used a lot in sort of discussions and debates and conversations about takfir among the ulama, among the du'at, among the mujahideen nowadays, and you won't be able to follow the conversation unless you understand these terms properly. So al-udhr bil-jahl is called the excuse of ignorance. As we said, sometimes it's an excuse, sometimes it's not an excuse. We've already accepted and understood that the shirk is never excused. The shirk akbar from al-masail jaliyah, the great major shirk from the clear-cut matters. And when I use the term like this, I try and be as accurate as possible. That's why if you notice, people will ask me, so Yusuf Akhi, is there excuse of ignorance in shirk? I will reply, there is no excuse of ignorance in shirk akbar from al-masail al-jaliyah. There's no excuse of ignorance in the major shirk, in the clear-cut matters. I want to be absolutely clear and accurate. I don't want to leave any room for there to be something, which could be included in my speech, which is not accurate, which is not part of it. So we want to be jami' mani', comprehensive and restrictive. Includes everything I mean and excludes everything that I don't mean. If I just say there's no excuse of ignorance in shirk, okay, there are many types of shirk which there is excuse of ignorance. Shirk asghar matters for such as at-tasha'um, at-tira. Some people have these superstitions, about they see a bad omen of the bird fly this way. This type of thing is not the same. You understand? It's not the same thing. Somebody had a horseshoe on their door. Okay, it's not the same thing. We need to understand there's a difference between shirk akbar from the clear-cut matters and some of the lesser shirk, or the shirk which is not clear, which is from masail khafiyya, the hidden matters. Okay, so there's no excuse. And I believe everybody is agreed about that point as well. Nobody is either really, in this sense. Not the mujahideen, not al-Qaeda, not Dawla, not even many of the government preachers. They have this principle. They do believe. If you ask them in different terms, this is why I say the terms will confuse everybody. Just ask the same question without these terms, become emotive terms, because it becomes the issue now. Those who say AlAATHIR, they're the Khawarij. And they're not necessarily the Khawarij. But it's become the issue. So somebody, when he hears that term, says, oh, no, I'm not with them. Because he just wants to be distant from them. Not because they don't believe that the mushrik is kafir, without, even if they're ignorant, no. But because it's become partisan issue, become an emotive issue between the different people and different groups. So if you ask the people, for example, is a Hindu kafir even though the message of Islam never reached him? They'll say, yes, of course he's kafir. You don't give an excuse of ignorance to him, do you? Meanwhile, even no message at all. He never even heard about Islam, never even heard about Muhammad. Is he still kafir? Say, yeah, he's kafir. Who won't agree with that? Everybody will agree with that. If you ask somebody, if somebody was committed to shirk, akbar, worshipping the idols, and he thought that was okay because he didn't know, is he mushrik? Of course he's mushrik. Of course he's kafir. Nobody will disagree with that. But when you start to use the word udhr bil jahl, AlAATHIR, then you confuse people. Why? Because in their mind, udhr bil jahl means something else from what you're thinking. Their mind goes somewhere which your mind doesn't go. When they use the word, when you use the word jahl or jahlul hal, they mean something else. So jahlul hal, what is jahlul hal? Very quickly, inshallah. I know, brothers, we are late. I hope nobody needs to go anywhere. You're okay, yeah? Okay. So jahlul hal is ignorance about the reality. Okay? So for example, when we talk about voting, what do we say about the voting? We say voting in democratic elections, parliamentary elections, is shirk akbar, because it is choosing a legislator instead of Allah. Okay? And I like to take it even further, again, to be as accurate as possible. If somebody asks you, is there an excuse of ignorance for that? I say there is no excuse of ignorance for the one who chooses a legislator instead of Allah. So clear. Who would disagree with that? Nobody would disagree with that. Even those who vote, they don't disagree with that. Do you understand? Because that's clear matter. And of course there's no ignorance about that. Nobody will claim man should be a legislator instead of Allah, except for a real kafir or mushrik, no doubt about him. But do people necessarily think that putting an X, do people think You got a little ballot paper. Okay? And so you got here. You put your little X here. Do people really think that putting that little X is choosing a legislator? No, sometimes they think, no, he's not legislator. This is just mayor. The mayor doesn't do anything. Or they say, no, this is just like a school board or something. Some people will be convinced, say, brother, if you just put this X here, then you'll get a mosque, you'll get benefits, you'll get welfare, you'll get this, you'll get that. You know, other people, you go to other countries, Bangladesh, they'll come along to the village and say, I'll give you 10,000 taka, just put an X here next to my name. They don't know what it is, they don't care what it is. It's 10,000 taka. You know, one day's work, easy. You know, you understand? So for some people, they've never looked into what it is. We're the ones who look into what it is. We're the ones who investigate further and we look detail exactly what this voting business is, what these elections are about. You know, when you speak to the ordinary person and you say to them, Akhi, can you choose a legislator? Allah, I say, no, astaghfirullah, never do that. And when you tell them that's what these elections are, they don't believe you. They say, no, it can't be true. No, there's no way that the Imam would tell us to do that if he would. Understand? Because in their minds, that's not the case. That Imam is somebody, he needs to question his Iman. Because usually they know what they're talking about. But the ordinary people are not all the same. So, and you'll find those same people who talk about AlAATHIR, make takfeer upon the Adir, they say that if you don't make, if you know, you make takfeer upon all the people who give excuse to ignorance of the mushrikeen. If you ask them about Jahlul Hal, and about the one who committed an act of kufr without realizing what the action was. It's like a slip. You know, he thought he was doing one thing and actually he was doing something else. He had no clue that there was anything involved in legislation. They will agree with you that he's excused. And people don't know that. They believe in that as well, just as we do. You understand? They believe in it just as you do. But because they call it Jahlul Hal, and they distinguish between this and Al-Udhub al-Jahl, so the whole time they will say, there's no excuse of ignorance in shirk. There's no excuse of ignorance in shirk. Then you ask them about Jahlul Hal, they say, yeah, of course that's an excuse. So is that part of Jahl or not? Other scholars, they don't use this term. I don't use this term. I don't use that term. I mention it here because they use that term. Okay, that's their classification. They divided the Jahl into two types. And they say this one has no excuse. And they want everybody to say, there's no excuse of ignorance. No excuse of ignorance. Other people, they include that as a form of jahl. It is. Look, the jahl is even the words even in the name. It's even called jahlul hal. It's called jahl. So other people, other scholars will say, Akhi, that's ignorance. Al-udhr bil jahl. It's excuse for ignorance. And they mean by that ignorance of the reality, not of the hukm, not of the ruling. So they mean the same thing, but they're saying two different words and terminology. And that's what will confuse people. Just these ones we don't need to go into too much detail now, inshallah. Adam al-qasd means basically like a slip, okay? You know, without targeting something. For example, okay. For example, okay. Literally, qasd is when you target something. Like if you're shooting an arrow or shooting a gun at a target, you're aiming for the center. When it hits the outside ring, you didn't mean to hit the outside ring. You meant to hit the center. You know? So when it hit the outside, that's called Adam al-Qasd. Yeah? Or even worse, you're aiming for the center of the target and you hit your brother. You didn't mean to. You understand? It's not intentional murder because you didn't mean to do that. You meant to hit the target and the bullet went that way. Your arm slipped. Your body slipped. Whatever it was, you slipped. You meant to say one word, another word came out, slip of the tongue. That's called Adam al-Qasd. And this is an excuse in the Sharia. Okay? Irtifa' al-Qasd is the same thing. Okay, but they just say basically, the Qasd was lifted, was not there. So it's exactly the same thing, just another term used for the same thing. I've heard Abu Muhammad Maqdisi use this term, that's why I mentioned it here. Okay, whereas I use the word Adam al-Qasd. Okay, Tasleel means chain. Okay, so chain, we're talking about here chain takfeer. Okay, chain takfeer. So when you say, okay, I believe he did some kufr. If you don't call him kafir, then you're kafir. And you don't call him kafir, then you're kafir. And if you don't call him kafir, then you're kafir. And if you don't call him kafir, then he's kafir. If I don't call you kafir, then I'm kafir. This is called chain takfeer. Okay? This is called chain takfeer. So sometimes we have chain takfeer, sometimes we don't. Chain takfeer in takfeer al-nas, where Allah declares somebody by name kafir. Fir'aun is kafir. If you don't think Fir'aun is kafir, you've denied the Quran, you become kafir. Okay? But some people, Allah did not name, but He just described the kufr. So it's your ijtihad that this person fell into that kufr and he has no excuse. Somebody else may differ with your ijtihad and say, no, I think he has an excuse. I think he was innocent. I think he was under duress. I think he was insane. I think he was not accountable. I think he's repented. That's why I don't call him kafir. He did it before, then he came back. Some people can have different interpretation of the reality because there's no text about that person. You can't say, maybe Fir'aun was under duress. You think Allah doesn't know if Fir'aun was under duress or not? You think Allah doesn't know if he was insane or not? When Allah called him kafir, you think He didn't know? So obviously Allah knows. If you think Abu Lahab is not kafir, he has some kind of excuse. How can he have an excuse and Allah didn't tell us about the excuse and He called him kafir and had a fire? Allah's not going to make a mistake. So there's no way that somebody named in the Quran and Sunnah, or people in general, you can't say, oh, the Jews and Christians are not kafir. What do you mean? Allah called them kafir in the Quran. You can't say they're not kafir. Otherwise you become kafir. That's where you have the chain. Okay? Or even an apostate. Some people ask, is it only about kafir asli or is it about murtadeen as well? No, it's about both. It's about both. Because it could be some people Allah named them as an apostate. They used to be Muslim, like Ibn Ba'ura. Allah mentioned him in the Quran, Allah gave him knowledge. Then he betrayed it and Allah took it away from him. He being an apostate. Even Iblis. He used to be among the angels. Then he left Islam. He left the Tawheed. أَبَا وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. He turned away and then he became kafir. Musaylim al-Kazzab, Aswad al-Ansi, they've been mentioned specifically as kuffar, as apostates. So you can call them, so you will have chain takfeer. You will have chain takfeer about those people. Okay, so anything that's been mentioned, you will have chain takfeer. Anybody not been mentioned is your ijtihad that he falls into that category or not. And so then there could be difference of opinion. And we'll look into more of that inshallah next week, because we'll talk about more about the different opinions where people have differed about takfir on certain individuals in the past as well as in the present inshallah. Wa akhu dawana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Inshallah, I hope this is beneficial for us to at least have a start on this topic and to really deeply understand where these differences have occurred inshallah between the people.